Hello and welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking Podcast. This is a special Clerkenwheels series, a set of conversations that sit at the intersection of design, movement, inclusion and collective action. Clerkenwheels is a multi-day cycle ride that brings together designers, thinkers, educators and allies to raise funds and awareness for United in Design, supporting outreach programs to help open up the built environment professions to people from underrepresented backgrounds. Along with my friend Tom Bourne, we're riding from the University of Plymouth to Clerkenwell Design Week from the 15th to the 19th of May. But Clerkenwheels is about more than cycling. It's about who gets to participate, whose voices are heard, and how we design systems, spaces and cultures that are genuinely more inclusive. Across this series, we'll be speaking with people who are supporting the ride, hosting stop-offs, sponsoring the event, riding alongside us, or simply sharing ideas that challenge how we think about design, access and impact. You don't need to be a cyclist to be part of the conversation, just curious, thoughtful and open to change. So whether you're listening as a designer, educator, business leader, student or supporter, welcome. Miles Baker-Clarke is a Director of Strategy and Growth with Fusion Media Services and founder of the Cycling Culture Club. With over 10 years of experience in commercial and strategic marketing within the cycling industry, Miles is a skilled and passionate brand marketeer dedicated to bringing cycling to a broader audience and ensuring the sport's diversity and inclusivity for the future. Cycling Culture Club brings together people from underrepresented groups within cycling to share stories and was conceived as a space where all folks can feel welcome, where the community can breed accessibility, inclusivity and ultimately growth. I interviewed Miles in March 2026 ahead of our 5-day cycle ride to raise funds for United in Design's outreach programme. In this episode, we discover practical insights into building inclusive environments, how cycling can drive diversity and inclusion, the importance of storytelling in fostering community and representation, and why, if you're starting to flag on the bike, you need to start eating. Hi Miles, thanks very much for joining me on this special Clerkenwheels edition of the Multi-Story Thinking Podcast. As you know, we're cycling from Plymouth to London to raise money for diversity initiatives with United in Design. And part of the interesting sort of discussion around what we're doing is looking at other people that are involved in the same sort of issue. And also stepping outside the design world, which we're doing with you, and into the appropriately cycling realm. You know, as we're cycling to London, it sort of combines all of our kind of passions in one. Just the issue of diversity and inclusion is not unique to design, and you've done a lot of work around that with what you're doing, both in your professional role, but also a wider sort of impact. So just be really interesting to get a sort of bit of background of your experience and your experience of both work and the issue of diversity, and what led you to develop the Cycling Culture Club and your kind of passion for making cycling more diverse and inclusive.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And appreciate you having me on. As when we spoke about it in the past, we aligned pretty quickly on not only a passion point, but also where those two worlds intersect. And I'm in I guess I'd call it a fortunate position, but I guess it's a fortuitous position that I've been able to straddle this world of cycling and diversity, but not because I set off to do it that way. I sort of fell into it. You know, I, like many, got into cycling for one reason or another. In my case, it was for transport. And then ultimately that led down a rabbit hole into becoming an enthusiast. And that journey led me to, I guess, realize quite how non-diverse most cycling spaces are. And I've got to admit, it took me years to really feel like I had any place to tackle that issue. I think part of that is professional growth and growing in confidence and growing in network and becoming more senior and having the ability and the time to carve out that space. But I think also it was a case of, being very frank, coming to terms with my own role in diversity, and not just it feeling like there was nothing I could do personally, but feeling empowered to be able to add something, even if it was small. So I sort of got over this idea that you had to be doing huge stuff to make a difference, and figured actually if I could move the dial on a very small scale, I would still be contributing to a better cycling landscape which is more equitable and inclusive and diverse. So that led me a few years ago through a few conversations with notable profiles in the diversity space within cycling, led me to found Cycling Culture Club, which, for those of you who don't know, is an initiative dedicated to diversifying cycling through connection and community, but also through content and research and exploration. And again, trying to connect people to do something on a small scale so that actually we can together build something larger.
I think that point around confidence and also your role within it is really interesting. And I think I feel like a bit in the same position where I've found the position where I can, in some small way influence or help shape stuff, whether that's in an academic setting or in this case, we're cycling to London to raise money for design. It's actually takes a lot of courage, I think, to put yourself forward and have the confidence to make those decisions. What were the kind of key sort of things that you thought you could actually do once you decided you were going to do something? Obviously, you set up the Cycling Culture Club, but was that the first thing that came to mind, or what were your first steps?
I mean, I think really it was born from I wanted somewhere to share my own thoughts. I was beginning to have some thoughts. I was gaining confidence to share them, and I wanted somewhere to catalog them. So I started by just writing, just talking about a few issues, making some social commentaries on what was going on, easing myself into it. And it was over that journey of not very long, maybe a few months, where I realized actually stories are what bring everyone together. Human stories and human first stories is what ultimately leads to that connection that we need to overall diversify cycling. So for me, I was like, what if we brought in more voices? What if we opened this up and actually encouraged a wider contingent of people beyond myself, beyond my lived experience, to start telling their stories? And that's where really we sort of began, because everyone has their own unique and individual experience. And that was what was so beautiful about it, to be honest. It was, and the bit that really uplifted me was that, my lived experience was one thing and I could really absorb and be uplifted. But, in the worst cases, you're encouraged to think and consider the ramifications. And that overall was a real learning experience for me. And that's what led me to sort of think continually about how we develop this platform into something that can provide real value to people.
So were you thinking about trying to tackle the barriers to inclusivity, or just exploring the diversity? And how did you make those connections? You've got a great sort of range of people that you've featured. Was that through just reaching out, or people in your network? Or
so I guess we did want to outline the barriers, but it wasn't until in recent months, as we begin to be established, what I'd consider established, and have some funding and have some backing, that we can actually look to tangibly reduce those barriers. Beyond connecting people, there's very little we could actually do in those early stages. But in terms of how we want to move forward, it was actually about, giving people the confidence, like I found the confidence to share who they are and their own experience, and to allow that to uplift and encourage others to do the same, and by momentum grow what we're building. In terms of how I came to connect with all these brilliant people, some of them within my network, and I started off with my friends or the people I was connected with and who I thought would have an opinion, and I had some conversations and had a lot of yeses at the beginning, and that was great, and continues to be that way in some way through my job, being very connected to the cycling industry as well, and through my actual cycling experience. I know a lot of people, so that's a fortunate place to be. But actually, I would say we're beyond the point now where most of the contributors who are part of CCC now are not people that I knew before CCC. So I've done a lot of like ad hoc reach out, see someone on social media that I think would be cool, reach out. I follow pretty much everyone that I come across, start to build this sort of awareness with people. And I've even had people reach out to me to say, I'd love to be part of what you're doing. So it really works well. And then the last part is actually, I want our contributors to share with other contributors. So actually we can bring in more people that way. So I've had people recommend others, I've had people come in and, say, my friend would be great at this, or do you know this person in this place? I think you should talk to them. And that's been brilliant. And then my own podcast is another extension of that. I've been able to have some brilliant conversations on there. And people are much more open to talking face to face,
especially when it's remote. Ironically, isn't it? It opens the door to face-to-face conversation if you can do it like this.
100%, and that's been great because some people are just not natural writers. There's a lot of people who just don't want to do it that way. So I slowly evolved what it meant to be a contributor or an ambassador, from just writing and contributing to this sort of live media site to actually being part of the community. So maybe hosting a ride, or sharing our profiles, or sharing our stories, or writing, or being on the podcast, making it as easy for people to be involved as possible and reducing the barriers.
Yeah, that process resonates with me. When I started my podcast, I thought, right, who do I know? Call my mates, call people that are going to be nice and easy to interview because they don't, I know them. And now, like in the way you're describing, I'm getting people contacting me, or you reach out, you have the confidence to reach out because you've got the back catalogue. It's that organic thing, which is really interesting. And I guess similarly, I'm interested in the idea of storytelling. What are people's stories? What's their history? What's their journey through? And how that's obviously something quite important when we're talking about the idea of representation and using stories to represent types of people, if you like, or communities, or to expand our experience. That's been a real strong part of the way in which you've put together the club and also your podcast, and also in a way that I'm looking at the company you're working for, Fusion, and the way in which they describe their kind of approach. Storytelling is very important.
Yeah, and not by coincidence. I was involved in Fusion's recent rebrand. So for me, it was, pouring some of that energy into that at the same time as, Cycling Culture Club was also coming to be. I just realized the personal value of stories and what it brought to me, but also the individual value that each person who's telling that story can bring to a conversation in a way that the society desperately needs. We need to sit up and listen to people talk and find people who we can relate to. And that's how this society works, right? And when it comes to representation, there's that adage of, you can't be what you can't see. And I think that transaction almost comes from you connecting with someone else, and what better way to do that than on a human level, and exploring someone's personal stories and personal struggle and overcoming and all those powerful things and emotions that we as humans constantly connect to. But I think, practically speaking, I really saw an opportunity to be the home for this type of storytelling in a way that most traditional media, endemic media within cycling, just don't do. I think design, it's a bit better. You get a lot more of that sort of like creator's approach and behind the designer. And I really love those pieces. And in cycling, we get less and less of that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the synergies between cycling and design. There's obviously, a huge design element to cycling, and lots of designers like cycling for that reason. It's about kit, it's about performance, it's about the kind of graphics and features of what you're riding. There's a lot of interest there. But in terms of the aims of what we're doing within the design world and what you're trying to do in the cycling world, are there slight differences to the outcomes? I guess we're really focused on trying to bring a wider group of people into the design industry, because that's going to benefit the industry and benefit the society around us. What's the perspective that you have in terms of why you want it to be more diverse and inclusive? What are the benefits that brings?
So I guess it's twofold, right? So very, very practically, there's a huge number of people who won't see themselves in cycling and who may never get into cycling because of that. Therefore, there's a huge section of the market we're not talking to. Whether that's talking about race and ethnicity or gender parity, whichever it is, both have commercial opportunity. With my agency hat on, a big part of what we sell to our clients is this idea that if we can expand audiences and bring cycling and other sports to new audiences, then there's a huge commercial opportunity to widen the part of people we're talking to. So that's very easy for people to buy into and understand. And we're genuinely passionate about it. We think if you can, bring one person along on your cycling journey, then that's great, because we love the feeling of what cycling brings, from accomplishment to connection to challenge and overcoming. All of that is really quite easy to bottle and sell to someone. And I think it's the reason why we've seen these booms in cycling over recent years and decades. So I think that's from a very practical perspective. In terms of from like a community or a connection perspective, it comes back to that point of, why would you discover cycling? And if you did, how do you encourage someone to stay cycling? So put it this way, when I first joined my first cycling club 10 plus years ago now, near where I live in Tunbridge Wells, they were probably close at the time to 300 members. And I was the only person of colour in the whole club. Now, at the time, I was too naive in my journey to have really spotted the challenge that brought me at the time. But even just that underlying, buzz of, do I belong here? Whether you acknowledge it or not, was always there. And that sort of having to work slightly harder to feel like I fit in. And even today, we're slightly better, but not much better as a club, which shows you how slowly it's moving. So, and that's not necessarily the club's fault. It's also, nature of the region we're in, but also, other accessibility reasons for cycling, down to safety and road conditions and, lots of other deep topics that we don't have time to get into today. But what I noticed is that when I started to ride with groups who were more like me, that underlying buzz disappeared. And that's when I started to realize, actually, I started to notice that was forming a part of my everyday existence. And that was, taking a toll on my psyche, even if it was slight. So that is where I realized, actually, if you can start to remove that for people, then you give them an opportunity to thrive in cycling that they might not otherwise have got, or they would require additional strength and fortitude to get past, which not everyone's got. Like anyone else who joined a 300-person cycling club as the only person of colour might say, the sport's probably not for me, maybe I'll go and do running or something instead.
Yes.
For whatever reason, I persisted. And I'm trying to reduce the barriers in that sense, so that actually there's fewer people are sort of churned from cycling.
And so those obvious barriers in where you identify yourself as being the kind of individual in a massive group of people who aren't like yourself, those are there. But the opportunities in terms of cycling, there's the financial opportunity for your businesses you're working with, to reach larger markets, but you're focused on those wider benefits of cycling. It comes through a lot in all of the sort of online content, the joy of cycling, why it's good for you. That's a strong part of that, not just about making the money for your clients. It's about the benefits of bikes, cycling, the benefits of the communities that are built. That's a really important part of why you're doing it.
100%. I mean, and that's what makes it so easy to stand by, because we really do see cycling as a silver bullet for society's issues, from healthcare to mobility. It has a huge beneficial impact on society if you let it, and if you encourage it, and if you invest in it. So you've seen that happen in other European countries, and the UK, sadly, is very far behind most of those countries in most places. So we are big advocates for pushing cycling, not just as a sport, but also as a tool and as a recreation, because we know what benefit it can have, and we saw it during the pandemic. Sadly, we weren't able to maintain it, but we certainly saw what that could look like. So I think from a society perspective, on a grand scale, you can see that a lot of our core issues could be solved by having more people be more mobile. And that's not just cycling too, that's also, walking and moving and movement in any way, really.
Yeah, so Fusion talk about the idea of movement, don't they, rather than just cycling, although that's your specialism and your kind of passion. It seems to me you've got the dream job of living the whole cycling experience through almost every part of your existence, which may or may not be a great thing, but
Yeah, it depends on the day, right? Some days it's a bit much and you've got to find something else to do that's a bit sort of adjacent. And my wife is always telling me that I'm obsessive, and I'm like, yes, I am, but also like it's not my fault that my job and my passion and my hobby are all the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the reason why, as an agency, we try to not pigeonhole ourselves into just cycling, because we've got a lot of experience in running, and running has a similar benefit to being able to connect people and obviously boost that health piece and other things. And then you widen that further into the enjoyment of the outdoors, and even more so you open up sport and movement to a wider range of people, because in principle, and it is in principle, the outdoors is very accessible and should be. But I say in principle because in reality, if you are a person of color, for instance, the outdoors might be accessible practically and for most people, but it doesn't feel accessible emotionally for a lot of people. You might be the only black person walking on a trail, and therefore you might feel excluded, and representation is every bit as important in the outdoors as well. So I sit on the board of a charity called Opening Up the Outdoors, and our singular focus, is to improve representation and inclusivity in the outdoors as well. So I see how that has a direct impact, and how from our own proprietary data studies we can see how detrimental that can be to communities who don't feel like they have a space.
Yeah, I think that's another layer of the sort of barrier layer, isn't it, of over and above the practicalities or the cost or the safety issue, particularly with cycling, the infrastructure, the feeling of being part of a tribe is really important, isn't it? You want to feel you belong. So that's an extra sort of layer of I think what the right word is, a layer of sort of emotional sort of positioning, isn't it? Of how you feel about that, something that could limit or hold you back from getting fully involved.
And I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in your career, but when you see an opportunity to maybe change that and make that easier for somebody, whether that's that first handhold into that first position, or the conversation you have with a student, right, who you might inspire to tackle something, who otherwise would have failed to do so because of the lack of family support, for instance. Those are moments that stick with you because you've had a meaningful and lasting change to that person's life. And I think it's why, me personally, but us as an agency, we really back the idea that your journey starts somewhere, and if we can help facilitate that for somebody, then great. But I also don't want to come across as holier than thou. We're always trying to look internally and be critical and think, how can we be better and better representatives of the values that we preach. So we say we're the agency for movers, but equally we can be tied to desks far too often and for far too much of the week. So how do we encourage our team to actually get out there and move and live and breathe what we say we do? Because it's easy to say it, it's harder to do it. We've actually gone fully remote in recent months, so people can live wherever they want now within reason. And that means that, we've got colleagues that do live in the mountains because they want to snowboard, on their lunch break, or who do live in Spain because they want to ride where the weather's good, or whatever it is.
Yeah. How does that?
So, yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say that idea of building a inclusive ecosystem through the setting up of your business and the way in which you allow the individuals to, take more ownership of how they interface with the business. How do you maintain that as a community if, that idea of everyone working in the same office has gone out the window essentially now, but then people worry about whether there's cohesion across an organization. And I guess the bigger sort of question of that is, how do you create these inclusive ecosystems so that you can just maintain the momentum and keep everybody moving in the right direction?
I mean, the short answer is slowly. You build it and you test and learn a lot. And it's the same in the business as it is in Cycling Culture Club. You don't have all the answers. You know what you want to try and achieve, and there's pluses and minuses to every decision. So if you take it in the context of the business and how you keep that business cohesion, it's being more deliberate with our time. If we're going to spend time together, let's spend time together. Let's, put our phones and laptops down and actually, be together and be creative and connect in that way, as opposed to before, which was like office culture, where you're like, oh, you're in the office and you're maybe sat with your headphones on next to your team member and it feels like you're more together, but actually you could have been doing that same thing sat at home on your sofa, right? It doesn't really make any difference. So yeah, being more deliberate, I think, is a really critical thing for the business side. For the community side, for Cycling Culture Club, for me, it's been trying to, and I haven't solved this, by the way, but trying to understand the different motivators for different people. Because at the beginning, I had this expectation that everybody had to be bought into this journey as much as me, and that it was crazy that they weren't. And for me, that was quite hard at the beginning, because it was like, what do you mean you don't want to, write about your experiences or help me do this thing and be a volunteer who gives up some of their time? Like, what do you mean that's not exactly what you want to do, while I'm sat here till 10 o'clock at night, like writing blog posts and building websites and designing merch and doing all that sort of stuff. But over time, I've realized that that's just not everyone's reality. That's not everyone's motivation. Not everyone has the same capacity. Not everyone has the same experience. Not everyone has the same drive. And that's okay. So for me, it's been a journey of like, how do I actually accept that, pull on people's drive and motivation where it exists, and use people in that way. And I don't mean use in a bad way, but as in, accept help where help is offered.
Yeah.
Because definitely need it.
I think that's that thing about just taking the decision to do something and then pushing forward. And then if you can bring people along, great, but don't sweat it if it's not working. You just got to keep the faith, haven't you? That sort of thing. It's an amazing sort of initiative with Cycling Culture Club, or the challenges you see about sort of expanding or developing what you've already built.
I guess my biggest challenge, and I try and make this not sound like a trumpet blow, but is I tend to bite off more than I can chew. I tend to think I can do everything, and the reality tells me otherwise. And, my body tells me otherwise, and my wife tells me otherwise. And so for me, I have to sort of balance aspiration and what I think this could be long term with what are the small steps, what are the things I can work on tangibly. So for me, that's continuing to push forward by introducing new contributors. So we're at close to 80 now, and I think we'll be at 100 by the middle of the year if I keep at the current rate, which is great. The idea being that the more contributors I have, the less I need from each of them. So to keep an active and lively media hub website style through the blog, I need, a couple of pieces a week and a newsletter a month and a regular social calendar. And that's sort of it. I don't need to do more than that at the moment. Plus the podcast, which is supplements all of that, but is more of my personal outlet. Like I do that out of the joy of it. I don't really care if anyone listens. I've just enjoyed getting having those conversations with people. So that's the first thing, like keeping a good cadence of like the basics, I suppose, which I'm sort of underselling a bit, but you know what I mean? I guess more long term, I really want to look at how the impact of what we do impacts the industry that we're connected to. So I can't not look through that lens because my day job is through that lens, right? So for me, I'm like, how do we connect tangibly to, moving the needle from an industry perspective? So we're starting to have conversation with brands. We're starting to see how those brands are receptive or not to working in this space and doing something or investing in being better in this space. So that's a real big focus for me in the next year or so. Like, how do we connect with brands who truly can buy into the vision and then, leverage each other to achieve that goal? I think beyond that, I really want to look at connecting individual people more physically. So, as I say, we've got this huge network of contributors. We've got an even wider network of people who follow us on social media and who read our articles and our newsletters. But actually doing tangible, ride outs and pop-ups and moments for people to connect in real life, I think is really important. And again, that requires volunteers and some funding and, all these sort of practical things. But that's what I really want to push for and ensure is an intrinsic part of everything that Cycling Culture Club is. We don't want to be just a digital community. We should be a global community, but one that does exist in the real world. And then the last thing is, what are the tangible pillars and legacy that we can leave as an organization that the industry can use? So I guess at the current stage, it's like practical tools that industry personnel can use to be better in their day jobs, because a lot of them have an aspiration to do so, but a lot of them lack the confidence to actually do it. So an example of that is a community finder. So on our website at the moment, I'm building this finder that allows you to find a a community or a ride wherever you are. So say you land in San Francisco, you can pop your address in, set your filters, and it will give you some options of who you could ride with on that week. It's in early days, but that's sort of what I'd love to do. And then from an industry facing perspective, it would be like a talent finder. So if you're looking for a social media manager or a photographer or a graphic designer or pretty much anything else creative, I want them to be able to find those people within our community, which means that if someone at a bike brand or a brand within the cycling industry wants to do something tangible and they want to hire in somebody who is from an underrepresented group, they can make an easier decision. Because I know as a business, it's hard to find people who are not within your usual pool. You have to be very deliberate and take the long game, and you don't always have the time to take the long game, right? You know, there's ideal ways of hiring to keep your workforce diverse, but you can't always do that when you have somebody snapping at your heels to solve a client project or whatever. So trying to make that easier for people. Yeah, it's just the short-term basics versus the long-term strategic wins, I guess, for the industry.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. And I think there's some real transferable sort of observations and ideas there that could go into any industry, particularly the design industry. I'm slightly worried about the phrase you said about biting a bit too much off than I can chew, faced with a 250-mile 5-day cycle ride. Have you got any tips for surviving that?
Yeah, for sure. Do your training.
Yeah.
And I guess the stress there is you don't need to do all that distance in training. You need to do probably 70% of it, and adrenaline and the buzz of the day will get you through the rest.
Yes.
Speaking from personal experience.
Yeah.
But if you've done 70% of that distance in your training, then your body will thank you. Get a bike fit. If you've not ridden 5 days consecutively back to back, I mean, I haven't in a long time, your body is going to feel it. So yeah, give yourself a bit of security and reassurance that you're in the right position and that you won't end up injured. Fueling, it's definitely the thing I learned too late. Make sure you're eating enough on the bike, probably more than you think. Without getting into the details, 60 grams of carbs per hour minimum would be what I'd go for.
Quite detailed.
Trust me, we could get into that, but we won't.
It's another podcast.
And then I think,
yeah.
I think lastly, just why you're doing it. You're riding for a great cause, and use that to lift you up and enjoy it. Tom sent me the kit design that's been finalized at the moment. It's looking really good.
That's good, doesn't it? Yeah.
I think just enjoy it. Remember that what you're doing it for, but also remember that there is enjoyment to be had from it. I think far too much these days, we're riding for the completion of it rather than for the experience of it.
So, well, I think that's great advice, and I will take as much of that on board as possible. We did start this whole exercise by just imagining that we could cycle to London for the enjoyment, so that is a key core element of why we're doing it. We bolted on all the other bits, and it's grown into this slightly sort of alarming beast that is now, we've got some great people supporting us, and you've helped us out with a few things, and great kit, which we've had sponsored, et cetera, et cetera. So it's become quite a machine, which is great, because then hopefully we'll have some impact. I'd like to thank Miles for taking the time to speak to me. Very inspiring to hear his story of how he's tackled the issue of diversity and inclusivity within the cycling industry, and there's lots of lessons there to be learnt, both in the design industry and across wider society. It's clear that just doing little steps is really important. You don't have to take on the world, but having an impact at any scale can make a real difference. And his use of storytelling and narrative brings the world of cycling to life in a way that helps connect people and create communities that can support and welcome members into their group. It's really inspiring to hear the practical insights into building inclusive environments that Miles was talking about, and how he's able to leverage cycling for societal benefits that impact widely across our community. If you've enjoyed the conversation, you can find out more about the Clerkenwheels ride, the route, the people involved, and how to support the project at clerkenwheels.com. We'll be riding from the University of Plymouth to Clerkenwell Design Week, setting off on Friday the 15th of May and arriving at Clerkenwell Design Week on Tuesday the 19th of May. You can get involved in lots of ways: by donating, sponsoring, sharing the story, hosting a stop-off, or simply helping to amplify the message around inclusion and diversity in the built environment. You can also find links to United in Design, whose work this ride directly supports, helping to create clearer, fairer pathways into creative and spatial professions. I'd like to thank the team from United in Design for supporting our ride, Sophie Ashby and Alex Dawley, and behind the scenes, Eman Akbar, who's been working tirelessly to put things in place, Julianne Webster from Industry Publicity, who's helping us with the marketing and PR of our initiative, and Tom Bourne from Select First, my co-rider, for thinking up the idea, coming up with the name, and keeping me motivated whilst I try to do my training. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe, share it with someone who might enjoy it, and help these conversations reach further afield. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.